Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fifth and final day of the Virtual Island Summit. Thank you so much for being here. My name is James Elsmore. I'm the CEO of Island Innovation and also Island Innovation EU, and I'm very happy to be welcoming you here for this discussion on island-proofing EU policies, a framework for territorial cohesion. And this is a really pivotal moment as the EU Commission has recently announced its first comprehensive island strategy, which will encompass um, the entirety of the European Union's island regions for the first time. As Island Innovation, we operate across the European Union and across the world, but particularly to bring together the unique perspective of what many of the outermost regions and other island regions need when they focus on EU policies. And we'll have a very interesting discussion today, bringing together representatives of the European Commission, representatives of regional island governments, and also advocacy groups, and an interesting case study of how Scotland has approached its own island proofing policy. So there'll be plenty to learn, plenty to discuss. And I really want to focus today on moving beyond advocacy to implementation. So, what will the next few years look like as this island strategy is first consulted on and then rolled out? Just as I'm talking, if we can introduce the poll, it would be great to know where people are joining from. And while you're filling out that, I think it's important just to underline the critical nature of islands within the European Union, representing 15 million citizens from the Baltic to the Mediterranean, but also extending the European Union's reach to the Caribbean, to the Pacific, to the Indian Ocean, and beyond. And often these islands have remained disadvantaged in many aspects of international policy. And so that's really how this session will discuss how that can be addressed. As will be discussed, Executive Vice President Raffaele Fitto announced this year in April's Cohesion Policy Mid-Term Review that the Commission will launch a consultation on developing its strategy for islands over the next years. And that is the crux of today's discussion. And to give us an initial introduction to the importance of this strategy and also to their own work in the consulting stage of this agreement, I'd like to invite to the stage Maria Garcia Ramon, the Acting Executive Secretary of the CPMR Islands Commission, who is one of our partners for this week's event. So, Maria, over to you to introduce the work of the CPMR Islands Commission.
Thank you very much. Good morning, or what? Good afternoon, good evening. I don't know, depending on where you're connecting from. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us. We're very happy to be in this panel because for the last 30 years, more or less, the CPMR Islands Commission has been advocating for the recognition of insularity as a structural, permanent, and multifaceted reality, both at EU but also national level. So I believe that the viewers today will agree that despite the differences between islands, they do share some common challenges. And I believe that these challenges, we can agree, are not temporary disadvantages or circumstances, but permanent conditions. So they require sustained and adapted public intervention. So when we were preparing today's intervention, James asked me what would be the most pressing priorities of our members, island members, regarding EU policies. And actually, what islands are asking above all is this recognition that is not ad hoc. So as most of you might already know, Article 174 of the Treaty of Functioning of the EU makes it clear. To achieve cohesion in the Union, we must pay special attention to territories with permanent handicaps, and islands are explicitly mentioned. But yet too often this principle is rather acknowledged in theory, but not in practical terms. So our members' first or top priority is therefore that the EU framework adapts systematically to insular realities and needs, not through sectoral patches or isolated exceptions. We already have this, but through a coherent cross-cutting approach underpinned with predictable and adequate funding. So with this consultation that James was mentioning on the future and ever first EU island strategy now announced, we see a crucial opportunity to make island proofing a consistent feature of EU policymaking. I can also provide some thematic pressing priorities of our members that I believe illustrate very well why this systemic shift is needed. Improved connectivity and mobility, it remains a pressing priority for islands. Transport is a lifeline for territorial continuity and equal access to services, but yet links remain more costly, less frequent, and more vulnerable to seasonality and EU decarbonization rules. We also can hear priority for energy transition support measures. In islands could be front runners in renewables, but outdated grids, higher costs, seasonal demand patterns remain major barriers. Third, state aid rules. Current frameworks do not reflect a higher cost of insularity. Greater flexibility then therefore is essential to sustain services, support businesses, and foster diversification. Our members are also concerned by sustainable tourism. Tourism is, of course, a vital economic pillar, but its seasonality, its environmental footprint, and vulnerability to shocks demand for greater EU support. Of course, also priority for climate adaptation. Our islands are very highly exposed to climate risk, and their economies depend heavily on sectors that are affected by climate risk, as was concluded by the European Climate Risk Assessment recently. And finally, housing. Many islands face acute housing pressure driven by limited land availability and also a speculative demand. So we are happy to see that even if it's not an exclusive competence of the EU, that greater visibility is given on the European agenda with a specific commissioner dedicated to this folder. So in short, these are the six topics that islands are the islands' more pressing needs, I would say. And this shows how islands are not asking for privileges. They are simply asking for policies that reflect their structural reality and policies that enable not only the freedom to move within the EU, but also the freedom to stay, live, and thrive in their own territories. And the Islands Commission, the CPMR Islands Commission, recently sent to the European Commission, concretely Raffaele Fitto's cabinet, a first policy note gathering all these priorities and our expectation vis-a-vis this future EU strategy as an opportunity for a systemic and cross-cutting approach to island reality. So we're very happy to hear that the Commission is engaged with this future strategy, and also that we have a colleague from the Commission here today. We believe that this strategy is one of our achievements as an organization working, advocating for island realities and needs to be taken into account at EU policymaking level. We do have some successful stories on advocacy for islands, not only this future strategy, but also exception integrated within the emission trading systems, for instance, when the EU extended this emission trading system to maritime and transport aviation, island regions argued that it would place a disproportionate burden on their connectivity, as they rely exclusively, of course, on sea and air links. So the EU agreed to introduce temporary derogations for certain islands, covering maritime transport activities to and from islands with fewer than 200,000 permanent residents, and specific exceptions also for flights serving the outermost regions and operating under public service obligations. So these measures provide breathing space until 2030 for islands to adapt, and they represent a concrete safeguard won through island advocacy, for instance. So of course, these derogations are not permanent. We will need still to fight to extend derogations, but they show that when islands speak with one voice, Brussels listens. We have other cases, also the Ocean Pact recognizing island communities as a key pillar, and also the Commission engaging to create a future EU coastal communities development and resilience strategy. And also the specific initiative of the Commission when it comes to energy transition, with the creation of Clean Energy for EU Islands, that is providing technical support for islands to adapt and to go through the energy transition. So I believe these are all good examples that demonstrate that islands advocacy work, but in my opinion, they also highlight a deeper issue, that is that it should not require constant firefighting or exceptional mobilization to secure recognition. What islands need is for their realities to be systematically embedded in EU policymaking. And with this, I link with the last point I would like to make today. What do we need in order to make an island proofing a lasting and meaningful feature of EU policymaking? First of all, we need to embed this island proofing across the entire EU policy cycle. This means that before policies are designed or implemented, their impact on islands must be considered. There are different ways to operationalize this, but I would say the easiest one is to expand the currently existing EU territorial impact assessment. So they are used more systematically, more often as an ex-ante evaluation tool of the impact of EU policies on islands. They will say it is very difficult, it would add a burden, but we answer it is a political choice. The same way we are looking at the environmental impact of EU policies, why not looking at territorial impact of policies more in depth? And this implies also looking at the impact for islands. Second of all, we need to build a stronger knowledge base with reliable data on islands. A major obstacle we are facing for a proper island proofing is the lack of disaggregated and comparable data. Without it, it is impossible to properly design, evaluate, or adjust EU policies to island needs. We have some good examples coming from DG Reform and OECD multi-country projects and also universities, but what we need is to consolidate all this experience into a common EU framework and index of insularity, coordinated with Eurostat and ESPON, and this would greatly contribute to providing policymakers with the evidence they need to adapt EU rules and funding to island realities. And third, we need to establish an institutional mechanism for long-term coordination, what we call a new island pact. The same way we have an urban pact, a rural pact, islands deserve a dedicated platform to structure dialogue between the EU institutions, member states, very important, regional and local authorities, and civil society. So such a pact would help avoid fragmented and siloed approaches and ensure shared ownership and secure long-term commitment to island proofing.
Fantastic overview to kick off the session. Thank you so much, Maria, for that introduction to CPMR's work. And it's great to see how those decades of advocacy by the Commission have helped to lead to this critical moment. And as you say, all of the needs of islands across the European Union need to be accounted for this cohesion policy, which already exists, to be fully implemented. Before I go to our next speaker, I just wanted to share the results from the poll. And if you haven't already, please go ahead in the webinar chat and introduce yourself, share where you're joining from. I can see, unsurprisingly, that the majority, 75% of our participants are in fact from Europe, but we also have participants joining in from the Caribbean, from Mauritius, from other parts of the world, from the Pacific as well, which is great. And from within the EU, I can see from the Canaries, we have Tenerife, from El Hierro, we have people from Madeira, from Malta, from Sardinia, from Hawaii. So a real range of places participating in this discussion. I think it will be very interesting not only to learn how different parts of the EU are interested in having implementation of islands policy, but also how other countries and regions have implemented their own islands policy. And interestingly, a mix of sectors represented here between academia, NGOs, government, and the private sector, roughly an equal split. So that's very interesting to note. Okay, so now I'll introduce our next speaker. I'm delighted to be joined by Erica Clarkson, representing the Scottish Government, and she is the head of the Islands Policy Unit. And Erica, I know that you're also connected with not only the University of the Highlands and Islands, but I believe the University of Malta. So there's a few interesting insights there. And I'm very excited for this because from the EU perspective, there's a lot that can be learned from how Scotland has already gone through this island proofing process of its own. So, Erica, over to you.
Thank you, James. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. But any issues with sound, please, loud and clear. Great, good to know. Thank you. So yeah, thanks, James, for that very kind introduction. Firstly, it's really lovely to see so many familiar names here today. and to be sharing my panel slot with friends from other countries. Manolis and I, this isn't the first time we've shared a podium, so it's very good to be here with him again. And a special hello to everyone from Scotland. It's good to have you here. So I'm going to share a little bit about how we island-proof in Scotland and tell you a little bit about some of the things that we've learned that we feel might be useful for our colleagues in Europe. Just by way of a very light touch background, Scotland has more than 90 inhabited islands, from Shetland in the north to Arran in the southwest. They're all diverse. Some have just a few dozen people living there or less. Some have thousands of people living there. Geographically, they may be small, but they do play an outsized role in Scotland's story. Again, echoing some of the things that Maria said there, we know our islands contribute to renewable energy, fishing, aquaculture, heritage, and of course, world-class tourism for Scotland. And again, as Maria has already said, it's important to recognise that those islands also come with some real challenges. Island life in Scotland comes with real challenges. Higher costs, as Maria says, adverse weather, limited or unsuitable housing, fragile transport links, and in some places, declining populations. And those are, of course, common long-term challenges, which are not unique to Scotland, be familiar to many of you. But that is why Scotland is unusual in having a dedicated Islands Act, a National Islands Plan, and a legal duty on government and public bodies to island-proof decisions. So it's about making sure that policies and services actually work in island realities and not just on paper. So James has asked me to talk a little bit about how we do that in Scotland. We island-proof here everything through something called Island Communities Impact Assessments, or ICIAs for short. And these were introduced by our Islands Act in 2018, with regulations coming into force in 2020. And now they are simple in concept, if not in practice. In essence, every new policy, service, strategy, or piece of legislation in Scotland has to be tested against island realities. They've been carefully designed to avoid being, we hope, a tick box exercise. They're designed to be a gateway to better governance and better outcomes for island communities. So in practice, this means every conversation starts in the policy making process with, how will this thing that we're planning to do work in an island setting? And it applies not just to government. This island proofing process is relevant also to more than 70 other policy bodies as well, including our island local authorities. We have 6 in Scotland, health boards, including the ambulance service, other emergency services, Scottish Fire and Rescue, our enterprise bodies, and others like Scottish Water, Creative Scotland, and Audit Scotland. They all have to carry out ICIAs. Now, why does any of it matter? We believe that ICIAs strengthen cooperation. And here in Scotland, we have a dedicated islands team. Some of them are on the call here today, I think. My team. We were established in 2018. I've been here since the beginning. And we work right across policy areas, helping our colleagues, other policymakers, see things through an island lens and encouraging them as best as we can to listen really carefully to island voices. ICIAs improve fairness in how resources are distributed. They help services respond more effectively to local needs, whether that's in health, education, housing. But they are not just about challenges, as we've already said. They also protect those things like culture. They strengthen resilience. They support long-term sustainability of island economies. And in fact, it's important just to flag that our forthcoming new National Islands Plan, also a legislative requirement in Scotland, is going to reflect much of this by being rooted really deeply in the things we can do as a government to support population retention and attraction right across all of our islands. I could give you a small example of how ICIAs work in practice, just very quickly. Earlier this year, Scottish ministers looked to amend environmental regulations. And during the ICIA process, we discovered that backup electricity generators on islands just couldn't realistically meet the new emissions limits. And that's because power interruptions, like perhaps on many of your islands, are more frequent. So through the process, regulations were adjusted to create an exception for islands in those circumstances. And it sounds really boring and really technical, but for those communities, that change made a huge difference. And I hope it can show you in practice how island proofing turns lived realities into workable policy solutions. James also asked us to have a little think today about what lessons might be useful for Europe as the EU develops its own approach. So firstly, we would say make the process mandatory. Policymakers don't have time to do something unless they have to do it. If it's not the law, they may not, but very unlikely that they'll do it in our experience. Also ask them to build it in early in the policy development journey. Just start at the beginning and speak to islanders over and over again as you start developing your work. We mentioned data earlier. Make sure you have loads of evidence, gather the data, and please do reach out to me or the team, ask us about this. We have an island survey, we have a data dashboard. We'd be more than happy to share all of that with you. The next thing we would suggest is that you keep it simple, keep it proportionate. Not everything needs a long report. Third, it's important, we think, to ensure transparency so that islanders know what's being done with their input so that there's some follow-up. The best outcome we see is one where islanders can clearly tell where they've been heard and where their views have made a difference. And one final lesson, keep everything under review. Evaluate, learn, and adapt, and be candid about the weaknesses in your processes. In Scotland, if I'm honest, islanders sometimes see ICIAs as inconsistent or even a tick box exercise, despite what we do to try and ensure that it's not that. And those perceptions really matter politically and socially, and as policymakers, it's important that we're getting it right. So I guess if Europe is to succeed in this space, island proofing needs to feel real to communities and not just a kind of compliance exercise, because it's required by law. So build in some accountability, show where island voices shape outcomes, and just kind of be willing to improve the system as you go. James has popped up on my screen, so I know I'm running out of time. So I'll just close by saying that really we're still on this journey ourselves. ICIAs are only 5 years old in Scotland, and we know there are challenges, but they are genuinely already changing the way Scotland makes policy. The important thing is that we keep improving. Also, just before finishing, to say that although we're slightly outside of Europe now, we're really keen to keep our relationships with you all alive and well. We're also learning a huge amount from partners, Finland, Ireland, Croatia, and others. We've created a new European Islands Policy Network, which is great for learning. And from our side, we'd be really happy and delighted to deepen any collaborations by sharing our experiences, being open about the bumps in the road that we've had, and just kind of learning together. And I'll just close by saying that ultimately island proofing isn't just a Scottish issue or even a European issue. It's about fairness for all islands, and it's about ensuring island communities everywhere get the voice, the visibility, and the respect that they deserve. I will stop there. Thank you very much, James. I'll hand back to you.
No, thank you so much, Erica. That's a really, really useful insight. And actually, just to underline that intention, we've recently been working with the Scottish Island Centre for Net Zero on a project with a number of European partners as well. And I think it just shows that continued intention and the continued opportunities for collaboration, especially on island projects when it comes to EU and Scottish Island partners, which is great. And obviously the EU island strategy in many ways is broader than island proofing. But I think that this is a really useful case study for policymakers on the national level and on the Commission level to take into account when thinking about how these strategies will be implemented. So thank you very much for that overview. We will now move to an EU island region. to see how things look outside of Brussels from the regional perspective. So I'd like to invite Dr. Francisco Seda, who is a expert at the Cabinet Office of the Presidency for the region, for the Autonomous Region of Sardinia. Francisco, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm very interested to learn where you see, from the Sardinian perspective, the needs for the growth in the adoption of an island policy at the European level, and what you see are the needs for Sardinia to be represented in these conversations. So over to you to share your perspective.
Thanks, James, and hi, everyone. First of all, please allow me to express my honor in being part of a highly qualified panel that in itself, I would say, depicts a concise but very significant representation of the way the autonomous region of Sardinia works at the European level. Indeed, we have a long-standing collaborative relationship with the CPMR, which has been further strengthened and structured in recent years through the action taken by our office in Brussels, both at the political level and, above all, in the technical task forces which support the CPMR's policy stance. The European Commission's DG Regio is a key interlocutor, not the only one, though, as we will see, in the European institutional system where we take action. And Manolis Koutoulakis, that I'm pleased to greet, offered particularly interesting contribution to the Island Regions Forum promoted by our office in Brussels on a yearly basis as a leader of a 9 island regions partnership belonging to seven European Union member states. This preamble makes clear that at the European level, Sardinia operates within a systemic approach, since the island issue does not concern only the island regions, but is part of an overarching discussion about the architecture of EU policies. Our political and geographical core feature, which we share with the other European regions, can be expressed as peripheral island regions. Our distinctive peripheral insularity turns into structural weakness, as we know, in terms of limited accessibility, small domestic market, diseconomies of scale, and the lack of interregional network infrastructure that severely limit our development potential. Accessibility is actually the key issue, as it plays a fundamental role for competitiveness, entrepreneurship, and integration into the European single market. Please allow me to start from the concept of today's agenda and focus on the question it raises. How can EU policies effectively account for the unique territorial realities of island communities? This seemingly simple question actually requires a complex and comprehensive answer. I would like to highlight 3 key responses. First, for EU policies to take island realities into account, there must be a specific focus on these territories. The statement can seem taken for granted. Nonetheless, to date, there is no proper definition under EU policies that takes into account our specific territorial condition. The statistical indicators used by the European Commission in cohesion policy are mainly based on GDP, which in itself is unable to reflect the economic and social vulnerability resulting from the natural and permanent disadvantages stemming from insularity. Not only that, but the European Commission itself lacks precise economic, social, and demographic data on these territories, because the statistical survey conducted by Eurostat uses not 3 regions as its minimum cell, thus ignoring smaller territorial entities. Just consider Greece and Croatia, to name just 2 examples. We immediately realize that this family picture is incomplete, as it does not include entities such as archipelagos, dual insularities, and smaller islands. Despite the limitation of statistical survey, Eurostat tells us that over 20 million European citizens live on islands, territories belonging to 13 member states, from the Mediterranean basin to the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. This is not a negligible figure. Over 20 million citizens are like a medium-sized member state. I mentioned the need to focus on island territories. This also means keeping these territorial categories separate from any other. Very often, position papers addressed to European policymakers put outermost regions and islands under the same umbrella. Despite the totally different legal framework these two territorial categories are subject to, as well as the fact that outermost regions, unlike islands, enjoy a wide range of compensatory, more flexible and favorable legislative measures no other region benefits. The problem, obviously, is not what outermost regions have in terms of targeted legal frameworks. The problem is that under EU legislation, island regions are fully incorporated into mainland regions. The second element I intend to bring to your attention concerns the island-proofing approach. Today, with the sole exception of outermost region, European Union legislation applies with no distinction to all territories of the Union, which is to say that the EU regulates profoundly different situations in the very same way. Besides breaking the principle of substantive equality, this one-fits-all approach fails to address the challenges and needs of island territories, according to us. It is therefore essential that all European Union legislation include ex-ante impact assessment mechanism for island territories, more or less like the one developed by Scotland that we just heard about. So we should move to a sort of ex-ante evaluation of the impact of the policy developed by Europe on island territories. So what we claim are not privileges, but rather a level playing field, both for island and mainland regions, in order to be in a fair position. As Sardinia, as the leader of the partnership of peripheral European island regions, have submitted the request to set up an interinstitutional task force among EU institutions in order to complement the legislative process with a focus on territorial impact. We developed this proposal to foster constructive collaboration with all the EU institutions. So far, it has not been accepted. We have to say this. And from our perspective, it is a missed opportunity. This consideration leads me to the third point. When we talk about overcoming the structural and permanent disadvantages of islands, we immediately think of cohesion policy and DG Regio. Actually, this is a comprehensive and cut-crossing issue pertaining to all policy areas, as the treaty explicitly states. It is therefore essential that cohesion objectives be integrated into and pursued by all European policies with no exception. And let me conclude, because I see James' face on the screen, just to more political consideration. I think that in this very complex journey, Sardinians must face two main challenges. The first is to affirm their status as a peripheral island without falling into self-pity or fatalism, without mistaking a geographical condition for an ontological condemnation. The condition of insularity must serve as a springboard for a collective political action shared with all the other European islands to achieve equity and allow the island potential to flourish. The second challenge is not to be afraid to confront the elephant in the room, as we said also in Gran Canaria. The European Union is a union of states, and increasingly a union of states that are re-centralizing powers and prerogatives, including those formally granted to territories like Sardinia that enjoy autonomous or subnational jurisdiction. Sardinia must pursue with courage and foresight its own path to self-government and to Europe within this complex framework. And we are here just to learn from other islands, to cooperate with other islands and with island innovation and CPMR in order to get to the goal. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much for those points, Francisco. A number of very salient points there that you've addressed of how Sardinia integrates within that EU system. And as you said, I think it's critical that comparison with how the outermost regions are treated versus other island regions such as Sardinia. And I'm sure it's very clear that the outermost regions have benefited from and the very necessary policy that's existed to help to mitigate for their disadvantage. But we need to discuss, as we are today, how regions such as Sardinia, which are also clearly disadvantaged, can have similar type of treatment. And so I think this island policy will be a critical one for all island regions. From a autonomous region perspective, we'll move to a national perspective. And in many ways, in terms of the number of islands, I think Greece has much in common with Scotland. A large archipelago of many islands of varying sizes, and the challenge that comes with managing services over so many different islands. And so I'm delighted that we have here Manolis Koutoulakis, the General Secretary from the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Insular Policy for the National Government of Greece. And so, Manolis, with so many islands, how does Greece navigate EU policies that weren't necessarily designed for this kind of archipelago? Over to you.
First of all, thank you so much, James, and of course, congratulations to Island Innovation for this excellent opportunity that you create for us, which is another way to express not our love or our approach for the islands, because we are all either islanders ourselves or we serve the islands. So let's keep in mind that there is something like an island spirit in everybody of us that is actually dealing with the islands. So you have to love the place so you can apply things. It's not just pure logic. You need to have a little bit of sense of what are the difficulties or the particularities. So many thanks for that. I will try to keep the time, though the excellent contributions from the other friends, not just speakers, was exactly on what I will also follow. But let me start, and since we have listened from Sardinia, and they're doing great job also in terms within the European Union and expressing their voice and actually representing all of us in periods that we were not represented in a way that we should. So let me start with a statement that will answer a little bit on your first question. Before questioning actually the EU approach or strategy needed, is that we need to do an internal deep work or therapy, if I may say, on what nation or state-driven initiatives are in place or not. So apart from criticizing sometimes the European Union, the European Commission, let's criticize ourselves and evaluate that if we have done enough in our homework. So this was part of the discussion, and this initiated in Greece, the National Islands Act, that is now becoming a national pact in 2021. Of course, in Greece, you all know, it's not just the Greek islands of the summer that you all know, and you're very welcome to visit. We have 117 inhabited islands, but thousands of them, creating a pattern, a territorial pattern for Greece that is very particular. Not only about the archipelago of Aegean, but actually meeting the needs of all the typology of islands that create a puzzle that we need to solve. It's not a very easy thing. At the same time, you have islands like Crete, that you all know probably, and then you have smaller islands, less known, but still people choose to live there. So even if one person or one family chooses to live in an island, we have to serve and provide all the essential services and all those essential infrastructure for them to live on in a quality that stands for everybody. And since there is a great working document of the European Commission actually about the report on access on essential services, let's not forget, and you all mentioned, that this is something that comes from the national constitutions, but also the European Constitution. The Lisbon Treaty, it's not said publicly that it's the European Constitution, because democratically we didn't manage to have a constitution in Europe, but this is another discussion. But the Lisbon Treaty is very simple and very clear in what it asks us to do. So this is something quite necessary. In Greece, you can imagine that all the issues related to connectivity, the cost of insularity that is related, the cost of doing business, the cost of living is a driver for us to create not only just a framework, and I agree totally with Erica Clarkson that unfortunately, even in states like UK, but also in more Mediterranean Eastern states like Greece, Italy, you have to put it in an act and it should be served as an obligation, because otherwise it shouldn't be applied. So we did the same thing in 2021 and actually working on that, because we have to serve the territorial justice that should be applied. And it's not just around islanders that we have to discuss how sensitive we are and how vulnerable. It is something that should be expressed in a way that makes sense for other people, organizations, structures, and procedures, that they should recognize and be capable to measure the difference between what is happening, for example, in the continental part of Greece, and the differences and the diversification of what is happening in the island economies, that you have islands that they are far, far, far from away from the capital city of Athens, and still you have to organize the structure, the local government, but also the intervention of the national government on a local level. So you can imagine the controversies, the diversification, but let me tell you the beauty of insularity. Let's not forget that islands, it's not just a difficulty or a disadvantage. We consider as Greece that our islands is actually part of the pure economic support of our national economy. More than 25% of the national GDP is produced either within the islands or from the sea and the functional areas related to the islands. Let's not forget about that. So you can imagine that specific European strategies that maybe doesn't seem to be directly related to the islands policy actually affects the way that we see the maritime, the transportation, the industrial maritime, for example, strategy, the port strategy, the tourism strategy, every critical strategy that refers to critical functions, services, or sectors should be island proofed. Island proofing is not just a procedure, like Erica said, like a tick box. It should be a tick box, but those doing the ticks should be trained and should understand, so they can showcase the results and the impacts, actually, the socioeconomic impact of every decision, not on a legislative level, but also on an operational level. This is actually the way and the roadmap that we're following. We are very optimistic. By the end of November, there will be also the results of a great multi-country project. James, I'm concluding just to give the insight, because it's critical. We're discussing about what we need Europe to do for us, but we should be prepared. OECD, through DG Reform with a multi-country project, is going to give us a toolkit of how us, the European member states, of course, having the experience and the open relation with members, with states that we still feel that they are in our family. I'm speaking about Scotland, but not only, should actually follow the same pathway. We need a common definition about the vulnerability and a common methodology platform and index so everyone can use it. It's not just the example of Greece or the example of Croatia. So we will have a toolkit for the observatory of cost of doing business and cost of living, and also the terms of reference of how we need a tool for island proofing that works under the territorial agenda of EU, that we are all very familiar, but at the same time, we can incorporate and integrate those directions in our national pacts. So we cannot cover everything in 7 or 8 minutes, but for sure, let's keep in mind that our critical services, sectors, or policies that have direct or indirect impacts. We are discussing about an island policy as part of the regional policy, either the European or the national. It's not just cohesion policy for the funds, but it's cohesion for cohesion. Let's not forget that territories matter, and they have so many differences. And let me close with that. Let's not put the mountains, marginalized areas, and islands at the same time. We have difference in a territorial format that we have to recognize. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Manolis. And it's great to see how Greece is dealing with this on the national level, with its own regions, and how that interplays with European policy. I think we'll have some questions to get back to you with on that as we get into the discussion. But before we get into the discussion, and I will invite all of our audience to start submitting questions through the Q&A for all of our panelists. We have one final speaker, last but not least, of course, we would be amiss without having a representative from the European Commission. So I'm delighted that we are joined by Kadri Ustal, who is the head of unit at DG Regional and Urban Policy, which of course is the organization that will be implementing the island strategy, to give an overview of their approach. So Kadri, thank you for being here with us. Over to you.
Thank you, James, for the invitation. I assume you can all hear me.
Loud and clear.
And I would also like to thank the previous speakers, giving us very interesting insights from their perspective, and also the factual information that you've provided. It's very very relevant and timely. As you know, the Executive Vice President has announced that he would like to take a closer and comprehensive look at islands as a territorial, as he's responsible for the territorial policies. And we are now in the time of working and moving in that direction, where we would like to encourage all to come with your positions, your analysis, and feed that into the process that is just starting in the Commission. There will be a formal call for evidence in a few months, but I think it's very timely that all the organizations working in the area of islands now update and get organized to have your positions ready for when that call for evidence is started. From our side, what we need to look at, of course, and as speakers have said here before, an island strategy, which has never been done before, there have been calls, needs to be comprehensive, but we need to know and hear from you, what is it that today, and with the perspective of the years to come, what is the scope that an EU strategy for islands should be looking at? And by scope, we should be looking at which are the main challenges that islands are facing today, and a lot was already mentioned here today, in terms of energy, in terms of climate, transport, of course, connectivity, housing, declining population in some cases, tourism, I suspect also over tourism in some cases, maintaining heritage. So which are the challenges that we need to address? Which are the most pressing challenges? Obviously, not everything, down to every last one can probably be covered. At the same time, I also want us all to be looking at the opportunities. Because what's the point of having a strategy that only looks at the problem? We also need to see how islands can offer opportunities for themselves, for bigger areas. We have also heard some examples here. Energy can both be a challenge and an opportunity that goes well beyond the island concerns. Heritage, very importantly, tourism can be a double-edged sword. So we would like to hear what are the opportunities, and then we would like to see how those opportunities could be nourished, could be supported. We also, of course, need to recognize the variety between islands, and I think the thread came through in the earlier speakers. There are small, there are big, there are those that are doing extremely well economically, socially. There are those who are to have more concerns. It is not easy to provide one strategic view if the population, so to say, has a lot of variety. So that will be a challenge for us to address islands as a coherent group, while there is a lot of variety between them. We will, of course, in the island strategy, be looking at what are the current EU policies that concern islands. There are some that have specifically addressed islands with specific measures. And I think it's quite true that there hasn't been a comprehensive look at what is the collective impact and where are the gaps left between those EU policies that have looked at the islands. So this is something that we will be working on. I've heard calls here and elsewhere, of course, about the need for better data, and I fully agree. Good strategy, good policy start with from good data. On housing, there is a separate work stream going on with the housing task force, and islands I've heard today probably deserve a special mention and to be addressed also there for the housing issue. So I would say over the next year, maybe 2 years, we have a lot of work ahead of us. So I would like to again reiterate that we are very open to all invitations to discuss, to meet, and our mailboxes are very open to receive all possible contributions, studies, data that you might have, case studies to help inform the upcoming strategy for islands. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kadri, for that overview. And it's great to hear that organizations are encouraged to contribute. I'll now invite all of our speakers to come onto the screen. You can come back on camera, and we will have a few questions from the audience coming in. I'll also invite our speakers to pose questions for each other, because I think we have a diverse panel that will have very relevant questions. But just to start off, Kadri, just to clarify on something you said, I think there's many island organizations that might not have engaged with this type of EU consultation before. So just on a very basic level, how should they be encouraged to engage, like an organization or island group that hasn't participated in something like this before? What would you like to hear from them, and how should they approach their engagement?
So first of all, do really good homework as far as you can in terms of really pulling together the different views, because I'm sure there are also differences of what is the most important 5 priorities and challenges that you would like the EU to look at. So work on that, have a position ready, and then get that across to us. Getting it to the Commission is easy. It can be emailed to the Commission, to the Commissioner, to the DG, or you can wait for the call for evidence. And then in a call for evidence, there will be a website set up where you can submit it through the website. You can attach a document with your position. Whatever works, it will reach us in any case.
Fantastic. So we'll encourage everyone to look out for that formal call, but start preparing in the meantime to ensure that you have your position clarified. Manolis, you wanted to make a point on this?
Just a question, just to answer it also in a national context, if I may, because next week, actually, we are co-organizing with the Hellenic Small Islands Network, a conference actually in Enousses. Enousses is in a border area, a small island. And actually, this is what we are doing on a national context. I was speaking about the homework. The representative of the Commission is very specific, because we all know the methodology that Commission works in terms of that. It's the time, and it's exactly that with CPMR, also the Island Commission, we have done, or we should do our homework in a way that we know that the Commission, we're very sure, and it's actually it's very productive, because we are already participating in other dialogues open to suggestions, positions, and stuff. We have to help probably and support with a local national empowerment on those organizations that are coming from the civil society or academia on a more constructed way. So we have to conduct national constructive dialogues, so we can help them not to include our position in their documents, but actually to give them the floor. Sometimes they don't have the floor to express themselves, or they are missing simple procedures. So it's something that we are doing with the civil society, but also the small island governments. We just need to present them in a more simplified way. All these, for example, the new MFF framework, which is something enormous and huge. Sometimes you have to simplify things so they can understand. But before speaking about money or funding, you have to speak about your needs in a simple way. Doesn't mean that you have to do a doctorate or something to express your position. So what Ms. Kadri said is very specific. As Greece, as a ministry, is actually helping them to define and actually put that in a paper. So this is one of the most critical to keep a transparency. I think Erica said it enough, and I will emphasize on that. Transparency in everything, information, contacts. Doesn't mean that you have to put your opinion in them. Give them the floor and they know. Let's democratize a little bit the procedures.
I know that one of the questions that we've received from a number of stakeholders, and we can get quite philosophical in that sense of what is an island when it comes into this strategy, because you have many islands that are attached to mainland municipalities, for example, or that are their individual municipalities, others that are regions. And so what is an island in Estonia versus the Azores versus in Greece can all be very, very different. And even within the CPMR, I know you're focused generally on islands that have their own regional autonomy on some level. And so actually, Erica, I wanted to ask you about this. This is also our approach with island innovation, that there are these common streams that all affect all islands, but of course, by no means is every island the same. And within Scotland, you have some islands that are their own municipalities, but some that are part of mainland counties. How did you manage that diversity when going through a process when you're dealing with so many places that beyond their islandness have a lot of differences?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we did certainly battle with, and one that we struggle to ensure our policy colleagues understand. All islands are not only different to mainland communities, but they're very different to each other. A little bit like Manolis's islands, we have many islands that are off islands, so we have a triple insularity issue. And it can take many hours to get from one island to the mainland. We have guidance, and we'd be happy to share that with anyone. It's available on our Scottish Government website, but we can make some direct connections with you guys, which might help as you develop your own work. So we have guidance for our colleagues as they're making policy, where we ask them to consider not only the islands in their size, culture, language, location, etc., but how they compare with each other as well as with the mainland. So that guidance is clear. I can't think how else we do it really. It's still a battle, just getting people to really understand about these differences, and to move away from a centralized approach to policy making. And I think there is still a perception from islanders that people from the centre, from Edinburgh, from Glasgow, don't really understand what's happening on their island. The other thing we do, and I see there's a question in the Q&A from Malta about this, is that we gather data, and we have an islands data dashboard, which we again would be happy to share, and we speak directly to islanders every couple of years through our survey. So we capture very local issues, which then we can share with our policymakers, who can then use that to inform the findings of their island communities' impact assessments. Don't know if that helps, but it's the best I can do.
Oh, definitely. And I wanted to bring up the data points as well. So we still have that question on the table for anyone that would like to take it about the diversity of islands, but also the data. And this is not something unique to the EU, as Erica has said. We also had this discussion earlier in the week in the Caribbean, how difficult data collection is between different islands, and the lack of data that makes decision making very difficult. Maria, on either of those 2 points, would you like to come in?
Sorry, I was looking at one specific question on cohesion policy. Do you mind if I step in?
Go for it.
Yes, because it's one of our focus points at the CPMR, and I wanted to mention something very interesting. Now we have recently learned about the European Commission proposal for the MFF, so it's quite recent. We're still at the beginning of the procedure, but what we can see is that concretely in the national regional partnership plans, islands are in general considered as disadvantaged areas in need of a special support, and specifically in connection with the blue economy. there is no minimum or ring-fenced allocation for islands in the first proposal, only that there's a mention that their specific needs and challenges should be taken into account in these regional and national plans. And actually, the Commission is very prescriptive. They are already identifying the challenges, and they are, let's say, quite traditional. I'm answering the question in the chat. We see housing, transport, decarbonization, waste management, climate change adaptation, access to healthcare, and economic development. So even if, of course, there is a new geopolitical context, we see the Commission listing these priorities. But what we do see a little bit concerning from the CPM Ireland's perspective is the narrow definition of the challenges, and especially that it limits the ability of islands to identify and prioritize the needs through a bottom-up approach. So they are the ones that know what the challenges are. But here at the first proposal, at least, we have a Commission saying these are the challenges that should be considered in the regional and national plans. So a little bit of not very consistent approach. Yeah, we're going to have a new strategy. We want to hear what are your challenges, which is very much welcome, and we'll be definitely ready to contribute. And thank you very much, Scotty, for being here today. But at the same time, we see here a little bit of inconsistency. Of course, we're at the beginning of the procedure for the MFF and the definition of the cohesion policy, but we're looking closely to this aspect in order to make sure that this bottom-up approach can be better reflected in the regulation.
Thank you, Maria. And just to wrap up, Francisco, to concretize these challenges and to understand how Sardinia is treated compared to, say, a mainland region in Italy, can you give us some concrete examples of the challenges that the region faces and that you would like to see taken into account in future changes in policy that are not currently addressed with the way things are?
There's a situation that should be known. I mean, there is a condition that puts Sardinia at the periphery. For example, at the moment we have no representatives in the European Parliament. So it's very hard for us to make our voice be heard and taken into account. We are the second bigger island in the Mediterranean, and we have no representatives. We are 1,500,000 inhabitants, and we have no representation. So you see that it's very complicated to have an impact, to make to make a difference when you are in this condition. And so what we are trying to do is to overcome this kind of difficulties, working together, seeking for cooperation with other islands, trying to be a more active part of the CPMR, and having the possibility to transform these kind of intentions that are, I think, that are shared mainly, but all of us, and probably even by the European Commission, but to be perceived as something that has to be done, because we have a lot of resolutions in the European Parliament about the concretization of the 174 article, but we are still waiting for it. So, for example, when we come to energy, the production of renewable energy, I think we all agree that these are very important goals at the level of the planet and the climate change and so on and so forth. The point is that who is gonna handle and who is gonna decide on the impact that this kind of policies have on the territory. For example, the Italian state says it's not about, we have a mandate from Europe, and it's there's an interest, and we decide how much implantation we put on the territory, where to put these implantations. We said we have competencies on this because we have an autonomous statute, and we have also a people that is worried, as it is natural, about the impact, for example, on landscape, on the cultural heritage conservation, on the problem of who's gonna earn from this kind of this kind of implantation of renewable energy. So we want to be part of the decision chain and not to be cut off. And we look at Europe as an ally to face sometime the kind of prevarication from the states. So clearly we know we have to negotiate. We have to be in the game. We want to be in the game, and it's hard at the moment. And I think that if in general, and I conclude, if in general the European institution will be able to not only to have a strategy, but also to have procedure, to have a legislation to guarantee the interests and the rights of islands. In particular, I specify the peripheral islands that are not the outermost regions and are not the kind of island that are bridgeable, as like Sicily, for example. If Sicily is going to have a bridge, probably will not be an island anymore. But even if there is no bridge, it's practically connected to the mainland. But there is this category that is a sort of ghost, it tends to disappear, and we want to be part of the policies with all the instruments in a collaborative mood, but a very concrete mood.
Thank you so much, Francisco.
Thanks to you.
That's very insightful. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time, but in under 10 seconds, Erica, I just wanted to ask, do you still consider islands an island if they have a bridge?
We do.
No,
Yes.
okay. I mean,
It's in the act. We wrote it in law.
okay, so in law it is. But again, this is going to be the philosophical question that is going to come up under the island strategy. What is an island? And there'll be a big discussion over which of these elements count. So thank you so much to our speakers. We are going to compile today's discussion into a short report, and we'll be continuing to track this conversation as as this process of the EU Island strategy goes through. So anything that you would like to share with the audience, please do send over to us, and we will include that in this report to share with everyone following the summit, in addition to a copy of this recording. And of course, I wanted to remind any of you who might have missed it that we're very excited to announce that we've partnered with the Cabildo of Gran Canaria to host the Global Sustainable Island Summit 2026 in April of next year. So following this year in St. Kitts and Nevis in the Caribbean, the year before in Prince Edward Island in Canada, the Global Sustainable Island Summit is coming to Europe, to the Canary Islands. And so we're very happy to have Gran Canaria as the destination. And of course, this will be a huge topic of conversation for GSIS this year in Micronesia. So April 20th to the 23rd, 2026. And tickets are now available with a discount for all Virtual Island Summit attendees. You can check your emails and the link in the chat for more information on that. And just to mention, the next session coming up in just under 2 hours is on food security for islands and harvesting resilience in partnership with the World Food Programme. So looking forward to that discussion. As we know, food security, a critical issue also for islands. So to summarize, thank you again for the speakers. That was an excellent conversation. I could have stayed for another hour, but we are out of time, and we look forward to continue the conversation in various formats over the year. Have a great day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Islandness is a feeling. Islandness is a feeling, not a term. We don't need typology. It's the feeling, the spirit.
Okay, we'll see if we get that feeling into EU law then, Manolis.
Of course.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.